Asterisk, he walked into the bank for a routine check deposit, but walked out as a national symbol of dignity. The police were called, he was humiliated. But no one expected who would walk through that door, and what he would say changed everything. Just another morning asterisk. James Carter began his morning like any other. The sun was rising over the quiet neighborhood as he carefully laced his polished black shoes and buttoned up a clean, crisp shirt. At 67 years old, he carried himself with quiet pride, a retired U.S. Army Sergeant Major. He had served his country for over 3 decades. Though life had slowed down since his retirement, James never let go of his habits: discipline, dignity, and routine. That day, he needed to cash his monthly military pension check, but his usual bank was undergoing renovations. So, he decided to visit a different branch downtown, a modern glass-walled building filled with fresh-faced staff and long lines, asterisk, when he entered. He greeted the security guard with a respectful nod and waited in line patiently, checkbook in hand. James noticed the unfamiliar stares almost immediately. Some customers looked curious, others indifferent, but a few staff members exchanged awkward glances as he approached the counter. The young teller, clearly inexperienced, looked at the check, then at James. Her friendly smile faded as doubt crept into her eyes. "Hold on a moment," she said, standing and walking briskly to the back office. A minute later, a tall man in a gray suit emerged, the branch manager. He approached James with a stiff expression. "Where did you get this check?" he asked, bluntly, ignoring James's outstretched ID. Surprised but composed, James replied, "It's my military pension, sir. I served 35 years. The manager didn't even glance at the ID. Instead, he frowned and muttered something about too many scams lately. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm calling the police, asterisk." The room grew tense. A few customers stared. Some lowered their eyes in discomfort. James stood still, head held high, his check in one hand, his military ID in the other. He had faced danger on battlefields across the world, but nothing felt colder than being doubted in the country he had served so faithfully. The sound of distant sirens grew louder as James stood silently near the bank counter, still holding his check and military ID. His hands were steady, his eyes calm, but inside, a quiet storm raged. He had been questioned many times in his life at borders, in hostile lands, and under gunfire, but never like this, not in his own country. And not while trying to cash a pension he had earned with sweat, scars, and sacrifice. Moments later, the front doors opened, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped in. The entire bank seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped. Phones were slowly lowered. People watched as the officers approached James. Asterisk, one officer, a younger man with a cautious tone, said, "Sir, we received a call about a suspicious check." James turned to face them, not angry, just disappointed. "I'm a retired Army Sergeant Major," he said, extending his military ID and pension check toward them. "This is my pension." The officers took the documents and stepped aside to verify them. Meanwhile, the bank manager stood behind the counter, arms folded, looking self-satisfied, as if he had prevented some great crime. Asterisk customers began whispering. A middle-aged woman with a grocery bag looked at James and said quietly, "I don't know what's wrong with people these days?" Another man near the back shook his head. They didn't even try to verify the check, but James didn't speak. He simply stood with the same quiet strength that had carried him through battles far worse than this. Asterisk, the officers returned after a few minutes, visibly unsure. "Everything seems in order," one officer said, glancing toward the manager. "We just need to make a call to confer with the Department of Veterans Affairs." The second officer looked at James and added softly, "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir." James gave a short nod, but said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. Asterisk, the room remained tense, the weight of the moment heavy on everyone inside. No. One was prepared for what would happen next, when the front door opened once more, and someone walked in who would change everything. Enters asterisk just as the officers stepped aside to make their verification call. The glass doors of the bank opened again. This time, the atmosphere shifted instantly. In walked a tall, commanding man in a perfectly pressed, dark blue military uniform. His chest bore rows of medals, and 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. Every step he took was purposeful, and heads turned with a mix of confusion and awe. The room went completely silent as the man scanned. The lobby then locked eyes with James Sergeant Major Carter, the general said firmly, yet with unmistakable respect. James straightened slightly, surprised but composed. "General Hill," he replied. The 2 men shook hands like old comrades. The general then turned to face the officers, the bank manager, and every customer in the room. "Is there a problem?" "Here," he asked, in a tone that didn't invite excuses. Asterisk, the manager, caught off guard, stammered, Sir, we had a questionable check. We were just doing protocol, but the general cut him off." "Protocol." His voice sharpened. "This man trained thousands of our best soldiers. He served in 3 wars. He is the reason some of your staff can stand here in peace today. You called the police on him without even verifying a thing." Asterisk, no one dared respond. The young teller looked down at the floor. The officers remained quiet, their earlier confidence now replaced with discomfort. The general's eyes swept across the room. "This is not how we treat our veterans. Not on my watch." Asterisk, turning back to James. He said, "Come with me." The 2 men walked to the counter, cashed the check. The general said to the teller. She nodded quickly, processed it, and handed the cash to James with both hands and a quiet, "I'm sorry, sir." Asterisk, James didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He simply nodded and turned to leave, walking beside the general. The room remained silent, the weight of shame and realization pressing down on everyone. The lesson had been delivered, not with anger. The weight of truth asterisk as James and General Hill stepped away from the counter. The atmosphere in the bank remained heavy. Every person inside could feel it, the kind of silence that follows a powerful truth. People weren't just watching 2 men walk out, they were witnessing the quiet collapse of prejudice. The police officers stood awkwardly near the door, unsure whether to say something or step aside. The bank manager, once so proud and firm, now looked like he wanted to disappear. His face was pale, his arms no longer crossed, and his eyes struggled to meet anyone else's. Asterisk, before reaching the exit, the general suddenly stopped and turned back toward the lobby. "One more thing," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Respect is not something you offer based on someone's clothes, color, or silence. It's something you owe every human being until they give you a reason otherwise. This man gave 35 years of service to this nation. You gave him 35 seconds of suspicion." Asterisk, the words struck like thunder. Even the customers felt it. A young woman near the front wiped her eyes. An elderly man wearing a veteran cap gave James a firm salute. Others simply nodded in quiet understanding. James looked around, not with anger, but with the calm strength he had carried all his life. He had endured enough to know that dignity. It doesn't demand attention. It reveals itself when it matters most. Asterisk, the general turned to the manager one final time. "I'll be filing a report with your headquarters. This won't be ignored." The manager barely managed a quiet yes, sir. Asterisk, as they exited the bank, the sunlight outside felt different, brighter, freer. James breathed deeply, grateful not just for the support, but for the fact that people had seen the truth with their own eyes. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded anything, and yet he had said everything. Some victories don't come with applause or headlines, just the silent shift in people's hearts. And that day, something inside that bank had changed forever. A ripple through the community asterisk news of the incident at the bank spread quickly through the town. By the next morning, someone had posted a short video online showing the moment General Hill entered the bank and stood beside James. It didn't take long for the clip to go viral. Thousands of people shared it, praising the quiet strength of James Carter and the powerful way the general defended him. Local news stations picked up the story. Headlines read, "Veteran Disrespected. At Bank General Steps In to Defend Honor." Asterisk, back at the bank, the atmosphere had changed completely. Staff members now looked uneasy. The teller who had doubted James came in with red eyes, clearly ashamed. Even the manager, once proud and confident, was now under investigation. Corporate had sent representatives from headquarters to review the footage, conduct interviews, and speak with witnesses. What had once been just another routine banking day had become a national example of racial profiling and injustice. Asterisk, meanwhile, James received phone calls and messages from fellow veterans, neighbors, and even strangers. Across the country, many thanked him for his calm courage. "You handled that better than most people ever could," one woman wrote. Another said, "My father was a veteran too, and he would have stood right beside you." James remained humble. He hadn't wanted attention. He hadn't planned to make headlines. All he wanted was to cash a check in peace and be treated like a human being. Asterisk, he visited the local veterans center the next day. When he walked in, applause filled the room. Younger vets stood to shake his hand, and older ones gave nods of respect. One young man said, "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." James smiled, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. Asterisk, though the pain of the experience still lingered, something had changed, not just in the bank, but in the hearts of many who had seen the truth play out. Respect had been demanded, not with fists or anger, but with quiet, honor, and strength. And that kind of lesson leaves a mark that doesn't fade. Asterisk, a week after the incident. The bank sent a formal apology letter to James Carter, signed by the regional director. It acknowledged the disrespect, the assumptions, and the failure to follow proper protocol. The manager, who had called the police, was placed on indefinite suspension pending further review. But James didn't rejoice over the consequences. That was never his goal. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking something far deeper: dignity, understanding, and change. Asterisk, one morning, he was invited to speak at a local high school assembly. The principal said students could learn something powerful from his story. James arrived early, dressed in a clean gray suit and wearing his military pins. He walked onto the stage without flash or fanfare, just quiet presence. He didn't speak with anger. Instead, he told the students, "It doesn't matter what uniform you wear, what rank you hold, or what medals you earn. If people don't see your humanity, none of it matters. But always carry yourself with dignity, because how you respond in the face of injustice will say more about you than the injustice itself." Asterisk, the students gave him a standing ovation. Some came up after to shake his hand and thank him. A few had tears in their eyes. One young black student said, "You gave me courage, sir. You didn't fight back, but you still won." James simply smiled and nodded. Asterisk, later that afternoon, he and General Hill met one last time for lunch at a quiet cafe. As they sat outside in the sun, the general lifted his cup in a toast. "To you, James, you've led troops in war, and, now unknowingly, led a nation in peace." James chuckled, a soft, deep laugh. "I just wanted to cash a check," he replied. Asterisk, as they stood to leave, a group of people nearby, strangers who recognized him from the viral video, stood up in silence and gave James a salute, not out of formality, but out of respect. James returned it, his eyes firm and warm, and with that final gesture, he walked away, his legacy not just one of service, but of grace, strength, and the quiet power of being seen. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Asterisk, subscribe to Deep Wounds for more powerful true stories that speak to the soul.